Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
It was a profitable harvest, and Auditor Third Vesh intended to be remembered for it. He stood at the high rail of the auction deck aboard the debt-processing flagship Indemnity, his forelimbs folded in the posture of a being who had already counted the takings and found them good. Below him, through the reinforced glass of the catch bay, the colony world turned slow and brown and stripped. 3 days the Skarn acquisition combine had spent in orbit over it. 3 days of legal seizure, which was the only kind of seizure the Combine practiced, because every account the Skarn settled was settled with a document first and a weapon second. The colonists had borrowed. The colonists had not repaid. The ledger did not care about weather or blight or the long bad season that had ruined their harvest. The ledger cared only that a number on one side did not match a number on the other, and so the Combine had come to balance it, as the Combine always came. Vesh thought the mammals beautiful, in the way a man finds a full purse beautiful. He did not see people in the catch bay. He saw labor units, organ stock, indenture contracts walking on 2 legs. He saw the bonus that would lift him out of the 3rd rank of auditors and into the 2nd, where a Skarn was given his own collection routes and his own crew, and the right to wear the silver thoracic plate of a being who mattered. Manifest. He clicked to the deck scribe beside him. 211 viable units, the scribe reported. 43 flagged for medical depreciation, the rest sortable. And the recovered value against the original debt. 400% Auditor Third, before auction. Vesh let the pleasure of that number settle through his chitin. 400%. The colony had owed a modest sum, the kind of sum that should have been settled with a few dozen indentures and a polite withdrawal. But the Combine had a saying, passed auditor to auditor like an inheritance. A debt is a door, and behind every door is a house worth taking. They had taken the house. They had taken the world. It was during the 3rd sorting that he first noticed the old one. The mammals came through the processing gate in a long, shuffling line, and most of them came the way the catch always came, wailing, or silent with shock, or clutching their young, or making the small useless threats that the catch always made and never kept. Vesh had processed enough harvests to read the whole register of mammal terror at a glance. He found it tedious. Terror was a cost. It lowered the value of a unit, made them sickly and prone to self-deletion, and a good auditor learned to ignore it the way one ignores the hum of a coolant line. But the old one was not afraid. He was a human male, well into the latter portion of a human short span, with hair gone the color of ash and a face folded soft with age. He walked with a limp, favoring one leg, and he held himself with the patient stillness of someone waiting in an unhurried queue. When the line stopped, he stopped. When it moved, he moved. He looked up at the high rail, found Vesh among the Skarn officers as though he had known exactly where to look, and he raised one hand in a small, courteous gesture. "Excuse me," the human called up in trade standard, his voice mild and carrying. "I wonder if I might trouble someone for a call, just the one, that's all I'll need." A ripple of clicking laughter ran along the rail. The Skarn officers found it delightful. A unit, a single depreciating mammal in a processing line above a dead world, requesting the use of Combine comms, as if he were a guest, as if there were anyone in the cold black he might call who would care that an old man's number had come up on the ledger at last. Vesh did not answer him. One did not answer the catch. He simply made a note on his slate, the smallest note in the column reserved for behavioral curiosities, and he moved on. And he forgot the old human almost entirely, the way a man forgets a single coin he has dropped into a very large and very full chest. He would spend the rest of his short career trying to remember the exact moment he should have been afraid. It was that one. He simply did not know it yet. The work of cataloging was the part of acquisition that Vesh loved best, because it was the part that was wholly his. Anyone could fire on a settlement. Anyone could fold a wailing crowd through a gate. But to take 211 living units and resolve them into clean lines of value, to weigh and grade and sort, to find the labor in a farmer and the surgical organ stock in a sick child and the breeding contract in a young pair, that was art. That was the discipline of a true auditor, and Vesh performed it with the loving cruelty of a craftsman. He worked through them one at a time at the appraisal table, his slate filling with their reduced and itemized lives. This one, strong, sound of limb, heavy labor, mining indenture, good resale. This one, clever-eyed and quick with numbers, clerical bond, lower physical value but useful, set aside. This one, old and failing, depreciation, harvest for parts, minimal logging. He did not look at their faces longer than he needed to. Faces were a distraction from value. The old human came to the table near the end of the second shift. He sat when the restraint frame guided him down, and he folded his soft hands in his lap, and he waited while Vesh ran the scanner over him without saying a word. The scan came back unremarkable. Aging male, organ function in measurable decline, no enhancement, no augmetics, no implants of value, one old surgical repair in the bad leg, nothing the combine could not buy cheaper elsewhere. A liability, very nearly. The kind of unit a careless auditor logged at a loss simply to clear the manifest. Name, Vesh clicked, more out of procedure than interest. Walter Rays, the old man said. Occupation. Oh, Walter said, and he seemed to consider the question with real care, the way a being considers a question he wants to answer honestly. I suppose you'd call me a man who knows people. I help them find each other. I help them settle things. Disagreements, mostly. Debts. A small, dry smile creased the soft folds of his face. I'm rather good at debts as it happens. Vesh logged him as unskilled. Low-grade labor, declining, depreciation pending. The mammal's self-importance was a common enough thing in the catch. They all believed themselves to be someone, right up until the gate folded shut behind them, and Vesh had long ago stopped finding it even amusing. I do still need to make that call, Walter said, as the frame began to guide him up and away. It's a small thing, one call, I'd rather not let it wait. The talking box was confiscated with your effects, Vesh told him, because it pleased him briefly to inform a unit of its own powerlessness. It is property of the combine now. It will be assessed. And if it is worth anything, it will be sold. It isn't worth anything, Walter agreed pleasantly. It's a very old model, but I would like to use it all the same. They had taken it off him in the catch bay along with the rest of his effects, and Vesh had seen it logged. One personal communication device, primitive single handset, of a make so antique that the property scribe had nearly missed it among the man's belongings entirely. It had gone into a property bin on the lower property deck, in a drawer among 1,000 other confiscated trinkets, switched off, forgotten, worth less than the energy it would take to recycle it. The scarn passed it from claw to claw at the appraisal stations that shift, holding it up to the light, clicking their mockery. The primitive talking box, the old mammal's treasure. Imagine, they said, a being who travels the black with a thing like that and believes it makes him a man of consequence. Vesh held it himself for a moment, turning it over. It was warm from many years of being held. The casing was worn smooth at the corners where a thumb had rested 10,000 times. There was nothing inside it of value. He set it back in the drawer and slid the drawer shut, and he went back to the work of turning 211 lives into clean columns of profit. And his confidence in that hour was a complete and seamless thing, without a single crack in it anywhere. He had never felt so certain of anything as he felt, that shift, that he understood exactly what everything aboard the indemnity was worth. The first wrongness was so small that no one connected it to anything. A fuel contract failed to arrive. The indemnity ran on processed hydrogen drawn down from a tanker rendezvous scheduled months in advance, a standing arrangement with a supplier the Combine had used for 40 years, and on the morning after the cataloging the tanker simply did not appear at the meeting point. No message, no breach notice, no demand for renegotiation. The supplier had not refused the Combine. The supplier had, by every record the indemnity could pull, ceased to acknowledge that the Combine existed. The fuel master clicked his irritation across the command deck and rerouted to a secondary supplier, and thought no more about it, because a single missed delivery in 40 years was an anomaly and not a pattern, and the Skarn were a people who lived and died by the difference between the two. But by the next shift there was a second anomaly, and the second one had teeth. The Combine's primary creditor, the lending house that fronted the capital for acquisition voyages, that turned the Combine's seized assets into liquid wealth and took its comfortable percentage for the service, froze the indemnity's operating accounts. Not all of them, just enough. Just the working capital, the funds that paid the crew and bought the fuel and greased the long machinery of a collection voyage, locked behind a notice so curt it was almost insulting. Pending review of counterparty risk. No explanation of what risk. No officer who would take a call. The lending house had done business with the Combine for 3 generations, and now the lending house behaved as though continuing to do so had become, overnight, a thing too dangerous to consider. Vesh was summoned to the command deck along with the other auditors, and he stood in the cold blue light and listened to the senior factors argue. And for the first time in the voyage, he felt a small thread of unease pull tight somewhere beneath his thoracic plate. "It is a coincidence," the senior factor insisted, his clicks too sharp, too fast. "A supplier defaults, a creditor reviews. These things happen in season. We will root around them." But they could not root around the third thing, or the fourth. A shipping consortium that moved the Combine's auctioned units to the inner markets withdrew its vessels from the Combine's lanes, citing reasons it declined to specify. A government 3 systems away, a minor government, a backwater the Combine had bullied for years into looking the other way at its collection methods, abruptly closed its ports to all Skarn registry and impounded a Combine vessel already docked there, on charges that had sat ignored in a magistrate's queue for 11 years and had, that very morning, been pulled to the top of the pile and stamped urgent by a hand no one could name. It was Vesh, of all of them, who found the pattern, because Vesh was an auditor, and an auditor's whole art is the finding of patterns in numbers that do not wish to be understood. He spent a sleepless cycle in the records bay with every cancellation, every freeze, every withdrawal laid out before him, and he sorted them not by what they were, but by when they had been decided. And when he had the timestamps in a clean column he felt the cold come into him all at once, the way cold comes into a hull when the heat fails. Every single one of them had been set in motion within the same narrow window, a window that began the morning after the cataloging, a window that began, as near as he could measure it, at the precise hour an old human male had sat at his appraisal table and asked, for the last time, to make one call he had never been allowed to make. Vesh told himself it was impossible. He told himself the old man's device was switched off in a drawer on the property deck, that no signal had left this ship, that there was no mechanism by which a depreciating labor unit could reach across the black and pull a lending house and a government and a shipping consortium down on the Combine's head. He told himself all of this, and he believed none of it, and he went to the property deck in the dim of the sleep shift and opened the drawer and took out the worn old talking box and held it in his claw, and he could not have said, if anyone had asked him, why his forelimbs were trembling. After that the collapse did not come like a flood. It came like a debt being called, which is to say it came in order, item by item, each one demanded politely and paid in full whether the Combine wished to pay or not. The backers went first. The silent investors, the quiet partners who funded the Combine's voyages from behind layers of shell accounts and never showed their faces, began to divest. Vesh watched it happen on the asset displays, watched the ownership of the Combine's own holdings change color line by line as one anonymous stake after another was sold, called in, or simply abandoned, until a Combine that had begun the voyage owning everything found that it owned, on paper, almost nothing at all. The flagship itself, the Indemnity, was discovered to be leased rather than held outright, and the lessor sent notice that the lease would not be renewed and that the vessel was to be surrendered at the nearest neutral port. And the notice was so calm and so total that the command deck simply stared at it in silence for a long time before anyone clicked a single word. Then the Allies stopped answering. The Combine had not survived 3 generations of legalized predation without friends, other collection houses, other mercantile combines, the loose dark web of beings who profited from the misery of debtors and protected one another's right to do so. The Indemnity sent the old distress codes, the calls that one predator sends another, the appeals to shared interest and mutual defense. None of them returned. The codes were not refused, which would have been an answer. They were received and read and met with nothing, the way a being meets a sound he has decided not to hear. The Combine's friends had not turned against it. They had done something worse, something the Skarn had no protocol for at all. They had quietly decided that being known to the Combine was now a liability they could not afford, and they had stepped back, all of them, all at once, leaving the Indemnity standing alone in the open, the way a single soldier is left standing when the line around him has melted into the trees. The auction deck emptied. The buyers who had registered for the harvest, and there were always buyers, there had always been buyers. The markets for stolen labor and harvested organs were old and deep and reliable, withdrew their bids one after another until the deck stood silent, and the 211 units sat ungraded and unsold in the catch bay, suddenly worth nothing. Not because they had lost value, but because no one in the entire reach of the Combine's commerce would now be seen buying anything the Combine had to sell. And it was here, somewhere in the long, terrible descent of it, that Auditor Third Vesh understood the thing that he had been refusing to understand since he had found the pattern in the timestamps. The Combine was not having a run of bad fortune. The Combine was being collected. Every account it had ever held open in the wide economy of the black, every favor it had never returned, every government it had bullied, every partner it had cheated by a margin small enough to ignore, every creditor it had squeezed, every lane it had monopolized, all of it was being called due at once, in order, by a hand that knew precisely which thread to pull, and in what sequence to pull it so that the whole vast structure of Skarn power would come apart not with an explosion but with the quiet, irresistible logic of a ledger being balanced. There was no fleet bearing down on them. There was no weapon. There was only the steady, patient withdrawal of everything that had ever made the Combine strong, and the Skarn, who had spent their entire history as the ones who came to collect, discovered that they had never once imagined what it would feel like to be the debt. The crew began to come apart before the ship did. There were desertions at the neutral port where the leased flagship was meant to be surrendered. There were factors who emptied what accounts they could still reach and vanished into the stations. The senior factor who had insisted on coincidence locked himself in his quarters and would not come out, and the command deck filled instead with junior officers who had no idea what to do, because nothing in the long, brutal education of a Skarn auditor had prepared them for an enemy that never raised a weapon and could not, therefore, be answered with one. It was the executives, in the end, who went down to the catch bay. The remaining factors of the Combine, the silver-plated beings who had stood at the high rail with Vesh and counted the takings and found them good, descended together into the bay where the unsold units sat, and they walked the long line of mammals they had meant to sell, searching the faces they had spent the whole voyage refusing to look at, until they found the old human male sitting calm and patient exactly where the cataloging had left him. Vesh went with them. He had to. He was the one who had found the pattern, and so he was the one made to carry the worn old talking box down into the bay, holding it out before him in his trembling claw like an offering or an apology or a thing he was afraid to be caught having touched. Walter Reyes looked up at the ring of silver-plated executives standing over him, and at the junior auditor holding out his confiscated phone, and there was nothing of triumph in his soft old face. There was only a kind of tired patience, the patience of a being who has done this sort of thing before and takes no joy in having to do it again. "We will release you," the senior-most factor clicked, and his voice had none of the loving cruelty of an auditor in it now. It was the voice of a being negotiating for his life. "All of them, the whole catch. We will return the world. We will undo it. Only make it stop. Whatever you have set in motion, call it back." "I haven't set anything in motion yet," Walter said. The bay went very still. "That's rather the trouble," he went on gently, as though explaining something to a child who had broken a thing he did not understand. "I asked, you'll remember. I asked a great many times, just the one call. I told you it was all I'd need." He looked at the worn phone in Vesh's claw, and Vesh found to his own horror that his limbs had moved on their own and the device was now resting in the old man's open palm. "Everything that's happened to you these last days happened because I haven't called anyone. Because I missed my appointments. Do you see? I'm an old man with a great many friends, and when an old man with a great many friends goes quiet, when he doesn't arrive where he's expected, when he doesn't answer, when the last anyone heard, he'd been taken by a debt collection fleet over a stripped little world, his friends tend to notice. And his friends tend to ask after him. And the people who took him tend to find that the whole sky has, very quietly, turned its back." He turned the phone over in his soft hands, the way Vesh had turned it over on the property deck, and his thumb found the worn place in the corner where a thumb had rested 10,000 times. "I never raised a fist in my life," Walter Reyes said. "Never had to. You spend 40 years settling other people's debts fairly. You give a struggling supplier an extra season. You find a buyer for a man who's about to lose everything. You talk 2 fleets out of a war over a shipping lane that wasn't worth 1 life, let alone 1,000. You do that for 40 years, quietly, asking nothing, and a strange thing happens. The whole galaxy ends up owing you. Not money. Nothing so small as money. They owe you the thing money can't buy, which is the benefit of the doubt. The willingness to pick up when you call. And the willingness," he added, and for the first time something cool and absolute moved beneath the softness of his voice, "to stop picking up for the ones who took you." He pressed a single key. The old device woke with a small, ordinary sound, a sound so domestic and so human that it seemed obscene in the cold steel of the catch bay. A list of names scrolled up the cracked little screen, longer than any of them could read, names from 1,000 worlds and 100 species, governors and bankers and admirals and dockhands, and the small forgotten people whose gratitude is worth more than any of them. Every one of them a debt of kindness waiting 40 years to be repaid. Walter Reyes lifted the phone to the side of his head, in the old human way, and he looked up at the ring of silver-plated beings who had meant to sell him for parts, and he made his one call. "It's me," he said to whoever answered in a voice gone suddenly very gentle and very tired. "Yes, I'm all right. They're letting everyone go." He listened a moment. "No, don't send anyone. There's no need for that." He glanced once at the trembling junior auditor still standing closest to him, the one who had carried his phone down into the dark. "They've understood the arithmetic. Just see them home, would you? The ones from the colony, 211. And put the world back the way it was, as near as it can be put. The Combine will cover it. They're going to find they're very motivated to cover it." He lowered the phone. That was all. That was the whole of the most dangerous call in the reach of the black, an old man telling a friend not to worry, and asking, please, that some people be taken home. Combine dissolved within the season, not by force. No court ordered it, no fleet destroyed it. It simply ran out of every account it had ever drawn upon. the way a fire runs out of air until there was nothing left of it but a name on old debt instruments and a cautionary clicking the older auditors used to frighten the young. The indemnity was surrendered. The colony was rebuilt slowly, with funds drawn from the seized assets of the beings who had stripped it. The 211 went home. An auditor third Vesh, who lived, who was let live, which he came in time to understand was its own kind of sentence, spent the rest of his small career trying to explain to anyone who would listen the thing he had learned in the catch bay of a dying flagship, that his people had always measured power as the Combine measured everything, in what could be seized, in what could be forced, in the cold arithmetic of the ledger, and that they had been catastrophically, generationally wrong. That there was a deeper ledger underneath the one they kept, a ledger written not in debts owed to you, but in debts you had quietly forgiven, in kindnesses done and never collected, and that the balance of that hidden ledger was the only wealth in the universe that no fleet could freeze and no auditor could seize. He had held the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy in his own trembling claw, on a forgotten property deck in the sleep shift, and he had judged it worthless because it was old and worn and switched off, and he had put it in a drawer. It had never been the device, of course. It had never even been the call. It was the 40 patient years of an old man being kind to people who could do nothing for him in return, until the whole sky owed him a favor, and one bad day, the whole sky paid. The galaxy's most dangerous man never raised a fist. He never had to. He only ever had to ask just once to make a call and to be very, very patient with the fools who told him no.